We are all made of stories. Each diasporic writer has got theirs. A warm good morning to one and all present here. Today, we have joined here to cherish a great topic of recent times, collective memory in Indian diasporic writings and cinema. Who is fighting with whom? A thought-provoking yet exciting poem written at its excellence came out on February 4th of this year. Yes, as one might have anticipated for, I take this my privilege to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry, Assistant Professor, Center for English Studies, School of Language, Literature and Cultural Studies at Central University of Gujarat. Every beginning shall be blessed in abundance by the good spirit all above. Let's ask for the blessings through a small prayer by Alexina.
There shall be showers of blessings. This is the promise of love. There shall be seasons refreshing, sent from the Savior above. Showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. But for the showers we plead. But for the showers we plead.
Thank you, Alexina. To boss is easy, to guide is tough, to guard is tougher. I now call on our HOD, our dearest guide and guardian, Ms. Sheena Saravini, to welcome the members in the meet.
Good morning to all. A hearty welcome to the academic fraternity present here today to attend the webinar, which I am sure will be etched in our individual memories and subsequently evolve as collective memory of the academia. The pursuit of knowledge and allied patterns of quest are manifest in manifold ways around us, writing and cinema being two among them. Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry has joined us today to delineate on the topic collective memory in Indian diasporic writings and cinema. A leading practitioner of cultural studies, she is Assistant Professor, Central University of Gujarat. With much delight and enthusiasm, I welcome you, Dr. Ishmeet, on behalf of Sakraday College of Advanced Studies and Postgraduate Department of English. I respectfully welcome Father Dr. Davis Chenginyadan, our Executive Director, to the webinar, and also our dearest Principal and Vice Principal. A note of welcome to all the delegates and participants and to my colleagues and students. I hope the webinar on this pleasant morning will be a memory to cherish forever.
Thank you, ma'am. The love and care that has made us what we are in the campus is all the effort shined from the one and only Executive Director. We, the students, only know how to reflect, yet he is the sun who shows us how. I invite Dr. Father Davis Chenginyadan to inaugurate and share a few twinkling words for our dear pals.
Good morning to every one of you. The Postgraduate Department of English organizes today one-day national webinar on collective memory in Indian diasporic writings and cinema, for which we have a unique personality on this topic, Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry from Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. Her edited book, Black November, brings out collective memoirs of Sikh community on the 35th anniversary of the anti-Sikh carnage 1984. The unprecedented collection brings together the voices of survivors, writers, poets, activists to record the systematic violence, rape, and trauma inflicted on a community and its enduring artifacts. Dr. Ishmeet touches the hearts of the collective vulnerabilities and the people. Indian ethnic communities, linguistic communities needs our attention, the attention of literature. David Emil Durkheim in his works explains how societies could maintain their integrity and coherence in modernity, an era in which traditional social and religious ties are no longer assumed and in which new social institutions have come into being. He then coined the word collective consciousness. The French conscious collective is the set of shared beliefs, ideas, moral attitudes, which operate as a unifying force within society. In general, it does not refer to the specifically moral conscious, but to shared understanding of social norms. Rather than existing as separate individuals, people come together as dynamic groups to share resources and knowledge. It has also developed as a way of describing how an entire community comes together to share similar values. This has also been termed hive mind, group mind, mass mind, and social mind. The philosopher and sociologist Maurice Halbach analyzed and advanced the concept of the collective memory in the book The Social Collectivity. Halbach's most important contribution to the field of sociology came in his book The Collective Memory, in which he advanced the thesis that a society can have a collective memory and that this memory is dependent upon the cadre or framework within which a group is situated in a society. Thus, there is not only an individual memory, but also a group memory that exists outside of and lies beyond the individual. Consequently, an individual's understanding of the past is strongly linked to this group consciousness. This idea of memory, Halbach pursued to prove through people's expression of commemoration in our culture. Commemoration offers collective memory tied to society and its conceptions, where physical monuments and rituals fix and affirm collectivity. Collective memory refers to a shared pool of memories, knowledge, and information of a social group that is significantly associated with the group's identity. Collective memory can be constructed, shared, and passed on by large and small social groups. Examples of these groups can include nations, generations, communities, among others. Collective memory has been a topic of interest and research across a number of disciplines, including psychology, sociology, history, philosophy, and anthropology. In this juncture, I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar, a special theme and our concern in our literature. I formally inaugurate this webinar at your disposal and all the participants, and I welcome all of you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father. For introducing the honorary member, I call on Adira Raghunathan.
A warm and a pleasant morning to all. As George Kaur rightly puts it, technology will not replace great teachers, but technology in the hands of great teachers can be transformational. We have with us today such a wonderful teacher. With utmost pleasure, I would like to introduce to you all Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry. She's a multifaceted personality. To start with, she is an educationist, author, and a poet. She teaches at the Center for English Studies at Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. She was recognized as an inspired teacher for Rashtrapati Bhavan, New Delhi in June 2015. Her areas of interest in research is mainly concentrated to literatures of margin, social movements, and studies of violence and trauma. She has also been actively engaged in comparative studies and translations, from Punjabi to English and vice versa. She is the editor of Patrick White Critical Issues, which appeared in 2014, co-editor of Violence, Subversion and Recovery, Women Writers from Subcontinent and Around, which was published in 2019, and author of Texting the Scripture, Sri Guru Granth Sahib and the Visionary of Poetics of Patrick White in 2016. Her collection of poems, Forbidden Button and Other Poems, was published in the previous year, 2020. Her best peer-reviewed publications include Religious Intolerance and Cinematic Representation, a study of selected short films on the 1984 anti-Sikh program in India, which appeared on Spanish Journal of India Studies in 2017. And the other one include Narrating the Experience, Oral Histories and Testimonies of the 1984 Anti-Sikh Carnage Victims, which appeared on Journal of Sikh and Punjab Studies in 2016. It is indeed a privilege to have Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry as a resource person with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Atira. According to William Safran, diasporic writers will have a collective memory of their homeland and have a belief that they will always be outrageous in their host state. I'm truly anxious to know more about this topic and the views of our honorable guest, and I'm pretty sure all of us are. For any doubts, queries, or thoughts, one may use the auspicious opportunity and note down in the chat session, which of those will be answered later in the Q&A session. With complete anxiousness and gratitude, I welcome Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry to begin the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. At the onset, I would like to thank Father Dr. Professor David Chyan, HOD Ms. Sheena, and Ms. Meti Jobi, who got me to talk about a subject which is very personal as well as dear to heart. Since I come from the discipline of literature, uh, I would be, in fact, bringing in a lot of stories, and I was very happy when the session opened, with a hint towards stories. And we all have our own stories to talk about. India also being a huge subcontinent, apart from diaspora, as we understand, there is a lot Indian internal diaspora also, and many of us have lived through that because we are born in one particular state where we have experienced a different culture. We go move out from those states, we go into other states where languages are different, cultures are different. Socially, we might be the same, but we all go through different experiences. And so, in a way, the movement that we see across the country, and how do we contemplate that movement? How do we register that? So, if I come from Punjab, apparently from Punjab, because I would be talking about my own rootlessness in a minute. And if I come from Punjab, I have been brought up in Himachal, married to a person who's from Andhra Pradesh, and our daughter is growing up in Gujarat. So, in a way, we are living many cultures. And so, where do we how do we define us, our own selves? How do we define where the very idea or the very question of belonging is extremely problematic? Where do you actually belong to? What are your roots? And if I go back to the family history, that I come from, and I would be, talking about this I would actually like to begin from this personal story, personal incidents from one's life, because I come from a family which experienced partition. So, movement was not kind of introduced to me as an academic subject. Movement was introduced to me as something very subjective, something personal. And as one gets into research, the very idea or the beginning, in the beginning, we are taught that we need to keep the subjective out in order to be objective in our research. The dilemma today is it really possible to keep the personal out? I do understand objective, but the dilemma is that can we really keep the personal out? So, do personal and academic query, or do personal and the public go hand in hand? And in this sense, I would open up talking about an incident uh, um, by giving a small background to the family history. And I'm also bringing it up because at the moment I'm also working on this project of family history. So we would actually be, in a way, I must say that we are all on a journey for 1 hour that I would be very happily engaging with everybody. So we would start from, we would be journeying into time and space both. So we would start from past, enter into present, and walk into future, if that is ever possible. And at the same time, we would talk about making of our country as we see it today, and how then we fly away from our country and return back to it because the roots are behind. So, in this sense, I would let us all, tie our seat belts and be ready for this journey, both in time and space. Um, so, my grandparents migrated from Pakistan to from today's Pakistan, the erstwhile India, the undivided India, to India in March 1947. I am very specific about the month because until now, the partition of India had not been announced. Um, it was March 47, and this place from where they migrated was a place which today hosts the nuclear plant of Pakistan called Kahota. Uh, they started their journey from Kahota, and they eventually landed up at Kurukshetra in Haryana. Um, they were all well settled. They started a new life. They were quite prosperous after having settled in Haryana. And after that, um, everything was apparently very normal. But we had a grandmother who would many a times get hysteric. She would tell us stories of violence. She would tell us stories of her movement. She would tell her stories of what all had happened to her, and how she had a news of losing her husband, and how he reappeared later on, how they lived in a camp and what was the situation in the camp. But the point of discussion that we are to engage with today is more than that, because all the time she was in India, she was always concerned about her childhood, and her mind was always in the past. She would talk about Kohota, and not just about the people who were there, but she would actually talk about the geographic beauty of the place. She would talk about the river, which was very much her life. She would talk about the mountains, and then she would talk about scattering of people. And she hated how her people had scattered all over the country, and some had also gone outside the country. So she would tell us jokes at the same time, and while telling us jokes, she would get hysteric, and she would suddenly begin crying. Um, so one fine day, while we were all sitting in this new house in Kurukshetra, now an old house because it had been about 30 years for this family to have occupied this house. This house was a Muslim Haveli, which was now occupied by this Sikh family. That is my grandparents. We had visitors. Somebody just entered our house, and we, looking at them, we realized that they were not Indians. They were people who had a brown skin. They were of our color. They looked very much like us, but they were definitely not Indians. And what made us think that was the attire they were wearing. They had a American accent, and they started inquiring about who was living in that house. So we were quite skeptic, and as we engaged talking to them, what opened to us, or what was revealed, was that they were that family who stayed before partition in the same Haveli. And as these people talked to us, they told us that they were now they had migrated to Pakistan from India, and from Pakistan they had migrated to America, and from America now they had come to Kurukshetra to pay a visit to see the house in which their ancestors lived. So I opened up with a couple of questions. What was the need for this family to come back? They were the next generations of that particular couple who would have moved from Kurukshetra to Pakistan, and they had already journeyed so much that they had already migrated to Pakistan. From Pakistan, they went to America. And now it was probably the second or even the third generation which had come to pay a visit to this house. And so there are many questions which come up. What is the need to come and look back? You've already moved ahead. What is the need to inquire about who is staying there? What is the need to even talk to these people? And my grandmother in this bid went inside and she brought a glass. And she offered them that glass. It was that glass which she had found in this empty house. And in all probability, that glass belonged to this family. My grandmother had kept it as a prized possession. The question is, what was the need to return this glass? Why did she keep it as a prized possession? Because the answers apparently seem to be simple, but the answers are really complicated. One answer that I would like to give here is because she had left everything of hers behind in her house, not knowing that she would never return to that house. She prized this glass because this glass was a reminder to her of her own possessions. So, in a way, she was being quite empathetic to these people, and perhaps in her mind, she had always waited for this group of people to come. Somewhere she knew that somebody would come someday and she will be able to return their possession to them, no matter how immaterial it was. Opening up with this, I would now venture into um, I would now venture into a few a few more let me say queries, a few more issues. I have a PPT which would substantiate. Is it visible? Is the PPT visible?
Yes, it is.
All
Yes,
right.
ma'am, it is visible.
All right, thank you. So when I talk about my grandmother and when I talk about this family which came to revisit their ancestral property, I'm talking about something which is situated in the mind of this family who comes to visit us. And what is situated is the past. The past is situated in the form of memory, and this memory has not allowed them to settle in their new location, in their new space, in their new place where they are. Because this past has also not been an easy past. Uh, so the phenomena that was involved in taking these people from India to Pakistan to USA, mostly involved, of course, the movement and uprooting. Um, so the basic problem is in the word uprooting. So movements can be either forced movements or voluntary movements. And when I talk about this particular family, which came from USA to my grandparents' house, um, and it's not that very couple who moved or who experienced partition. It is the second and the third generation that came to meet us. The very idea, I mean, or the very question that why did they come? Looking for these answers, I would like to talk about, what Siddharth Mukherjee, the author of The Gene, the seminal book called The Gene, talks about how memory locates itself, within psyche, which actually shapes the human beings in their future. It is this memory that makes them and it determines what they become. Siddharth Mukherjee says that, this memory is not just situated within the minds of one generation, but it travels. It travels across generations. And it is these generations which then kind of stay stuck, or at least in some corner of their mind, they always contemplate to these memories of the past. Siddharth Mukherjee also talks about his family's experience of partition, the northeastern partition, and he talks about how a lot of women in his family had experienced schizophrenia during the partition violence, or as an outcome of partition violence and uprooting. And so in his family, this strain of schizophrenia is repeated. It is also continuous because a lot of his own cousins have undergone schizophrenia. He says one can root or one can identify the reason in the older generation that experienced schizophrenia, but one cannot identify the reason in the new generations. And he says this is how memories traverse themselves within the psyche, and how they stay rooted in the psyche, which also travels through genes. And that is where these genes become very significant, because since they travel across generations, it's not so easy to forget the movement, the migration, which in a way is making a human being. And the making is also now not that simple. So what you become, as one moves from one's own place, one moves into the other space. My grandmother always lamented the idea that in her village, where she loved and she lived, stands the most dangerous instrument of hate, that was the nuclear plant of Pakistan. She said, "Why my place?" She used to say that, why the place where we loved and we lived? Why did this nuclear plant had to come to that particular place? So for her, it was not only a question of national prestige, or it was not just a question of security or political security or national securities. It was her own belongingness, her rootedness to that place, and how much she hated that an instrument of hate had come in there. In fact, sometimes we would tell her that, you've been uprooted from there. How does it matter to you? And she says, no, it matters because I belong to that place. That it was the place that gave me love. And I hate when an instrument of hate comes there. So my grandmother could never kind of settle in this new place, and she was always and ever rooted. So whatever she was today, what she had become, or what she was made today, was never minus what she was in her past. This is an example of forced movement, There are also voluntary movements, and in diasporic places, in fact, if I try to kind of define diaspora, despite, we have as an academic discipline come a long way, it hasn't been possible for the critiques to give us a standard definition of diaspora. The word comes from a Greek root, which in itself, the sporadic in itself means scattering or scattered. And it is like, so the idea of scattering definitely is there. And uh, uh, critiques have kind of defined it in many different ways. But one thing for sure, which is somewhere common in everyone's definition, is that diaspora is also a place of coming together of those people who have been scattered and who are outside the nation of origin. So it's kind of a social formation where people, find people of their own kind, and then they come together. For the last time, as I returned back to my grandmother, there were signs which the grandparents would look around whenever they saw particularly Sikh people, because they belonged to this religion. They would see the kind of turbans the Sikhs would often wear, and then they would ask them where they belonged to. And right from our childhood, we would be amused anytime we saw a Sikh man wearing a printed turban, because printed turban was the culture of that place. And we as children were sent that go and ask that uncle where he belongs to. And there was always this sense of meeting people, asking them how were they uprooted, where did they come from, were they the Potoharis were known, was a belt where the Potowar language was spoken. And so more than the territorial boundaries, what was important for these people in the in this new space, which was the new India, and the new nation, which did not exist earlier and which had all of a sudden erupted, was Pakistan. So it was always, a question of where did you come from, who you are you Potoharis, do you belong to the same linguistic belt? And so we lived in, and every time there was an association, there was a making of, or a remaking of the people who had come together. Immediately, the focus would shift to their past, and they would begin identifying from there. They would begin identifying with their past. The present, for a moment, um, was more nostalgic. And so people would talk about the days which had gone back. They would talk about past, and this was an attempt to negotiate between the past and the present. And this negotiation was only and only possible through nostalgia and memory. Having spoken about this partition experience, I would be moving on to how and I would be actually taking a leap from partition into various other locales that the diasporic writers have engaged with, both in writings and in cinema. So one another thing which is very common amongst the diaspora writers is the notion of home. Ah, so perhaps, the family that visited my grandparents, if I have to question them that what do they consider their home, so would they consider Pakistan as their home, or would they consider this Haveli in Kurukshetra as their home? So the conflict is not about where did they move to, it's not about where they are located today, it's about what is it that they identify with, or are they really able to identify with any place uh, they are in. So if they are now in America, are they able to associate with that place? If they are now, if they have returned to Pakistan, are they able to relate to that place, or are they still rooted in the past? Or if there is a word uprooting, there is another word rootless. So have many of us who are either in internal diaspora or who have moved away from their countries, are we, also kind of rootless? Um, I would now like to, bring in an incident from a seminal diasporic writer, Amitav Ghosh, who kind of, talks about the question of nation and national identities and how there is a formation of nation, a reformation of nation, how the national identities keep reformulating themselves, in specific locations, even in dislocations and relocations. How, there is deterritorializing and how there is again reterritorializing. So I would again take up this incidence, from Amitav Ghosh's book called The Shadow Lines. And I would talk about, I would like to actually talk about the concept of borders for a minute. I do cover it up a little bit later again. In Shadow Lines, again, a lot of people call it a book of, book written around partition or about partition, but actually the book is not only about partition. The book is about identities. The book is about how the individual struggles, how the individuals struggle to negotiate identities. And it is here, maybe for those who have read the book, they would know, but those who haven't, I would just, sum it up in, try to sum it up in just one or two lines. So there is a central protagonist, Trideep, who is a student of history, and he visits his extended family, that is situated in Kolkata. The family has moved from Bangladesh, and in Bangladesh, the some members of the family are still there. Now the family, returns to Bangladesh to meet one of their uncles who is there, and there is a violence and a riot breaks out in which Tradeep is killed. Um, Pradeep's own family is a family of bureaucrats, and his father has a lot of foreign postings. So there is a lot of traveling between different places. Primarily London is quite so much depicted in the novel. And Pradeep's brother Ronnie, towards the end of the book is in London, and he is trying to erase the memory of the way in which his brother was killed. He wants to seek freedom from this memory that is rooted in his mind, but he really cannot be free. There are days when he, dreams about Sudeep's death, and he wants to erase that memory. So he doesn't even want to go and sleep. So he wakes away for days together, and he wants liberation. So he talks about this concept of freedom as well, and he says, he seeks freedom, but there is hardly any freedom. So this memory that stays rooted in Ronnie's mind, despite the place, Ronnie is not even in India. Ronnie is in London, and London has nothing to do with Bangladesh or with India, but losing a brother, always makes him connected or lets him stay connected to his past, and he is unable to erase this memory from the present. So this is how these memories work. And when we come to the notions of collective memories, so these are individual memories, but these are collective community memories. For Ronnie in Amitav Ghosh's book, Ronnie's uh, um, friend actually comes to inquire about Tradeep's death. And for them, it's a kind of a collective memory. It's a collective memory for the family. It's also a collective memory for the community that went through this experience. And so there is this whole conflict, this whole dilemma as to how does one get rid of it. Is recovery possible from this traumatic memory? Is recovery just a notion, or is it really practical? Is it really possible? And so when we look at these concepts in this sense, there are events which always keep taking you back to some of these traumatic memories. But what have been the queries of the diasporic writers? Um, when they have been engaging with these questions. And therefore, one of the most important question is the question of home. Home also, connected one to cultural imagination and practice. So home is the place where ceremonies related to birth are conducted, or the death ceremonies or marriage ceremonies, festivals are celebrated, and the idea of people collecting together, coming together, is also always associated to home. So, for example, many a times, if there is a festivity time, we want to return home, we want to celebrate festivals with the people of our families or with the people who are our own. So no matter where people are or how people move forward or in different spaces, they do stay connected in the time which has gone, or in the time, or in the even in the cultural imagination. And that cultural imagination is rooted to the past time, because it is in the past time that they have been groomed to understand the culture. And it's this loss of culture which connects people back to their roots. So many a times, sometimes, in terms of cultural practices, for example, certain dances or music or even art practices, people in diaspora actually acquire great training around that and return. And whereas the people who are back home, they are kind of very indifferent to many of these practices. But this is just a very general observation. Uh, and so if we like kind of look at some of these concepts, and again I return back to Amitav Ghosh's shadow lines, and when it comes to these question of borders, so there are political borders, and of course we all understand, they are imaginary borders, right? Now, despite the fact that all of them are imaginary, they exist. They are, in a way, real. And there's a very interesting and a very amusing scene in Amitav Ghosh's Shadow Lines, where, Thama, the grandmother, is going to Bangladesh, and they take a flight from Kolkata. And it's her first flight, and she's looking down, on towards the Earth from the sky, sitting inside the flight. She takes a window seat, and she is quite disappointed when she does not see the demarcation of borders, because in her mind she had created some of these political borders, and she had thought perhaps countries would have made walls around them, and she's pretty disappointed, and it's like a child's perception, that she's watching down and there are hardly any borders, and then she says, where are the borders? And then Tradeep tells her that there are no borders. So their borders are on the political maps. On Earth, nobody is kind of, demarcating by drawing borders or barbed lines, or, except until, there are some dangerous borders. And one thing that, Amitav Ghosh in the book says is that there are more borders and perhaps more nations on the airports, than actually anywhere else. And these borders, in a way, are also, there in our own minds and in our own memories. So where we carry them with us wherever we go. So here, I'd also like to talk about Deleuze's and Guthrie's notion of deterritorializing, so movement, where there is a separation of the social, cultural, political practices from the location you are. And once you settle in a new place, you're rooted back, because you're trying to define your own existence and your own identity, by locating yourself in the past, and therefore you come back. And that is also a process of territorializing, where you're restructuring a place or a territory which has already experienced deterritorializing. And therefore, therefore deterritorialization and reterritorialization, they occur together, they occur simultaneously. And there are a number of experiences where a lot of people talk about these experiences, in particularly in the Indian diasporic space, in Indian diasporic writings. And we do see that, in a lot of works. If there were more time, I would have taken some more examples, but I would be taking one basic case study of Jhumpa Lahiri's book, The Namesake, and I would be talking about all these issues in there. Just take a look at some of these major Indian diasporic writers. There are many more. I've just been able to pen down a few of them. But before I actually move on to, the namesake, the question of identities is quite prevalent in almost all the diasporic writers. And the question of identities and histories, they kind of walk hand in hand. It's very interesting to see and to perceive how histories are reformulated or represented, in writers writing from a diasporic space. And in that sense, actually, I have not named Vikram Kapoor in this list, because Vikram Kapoor is now in India, and he did write. He calls himself as an Indian writer. So, but Vikram Kapoor is one of the works, which he wrote around 1984. He calls it The Assassinations. In that he talks about, his reason for writing that book, and he talks about his experience of being in America, and when he was attending a conference, and there was this attack on WTO, and there was a Black American there who came to Vikram Kapoor, and he said, "Now we will not be searched. It'll be you, the Browns, who will be searched." And then, we did have a history of, how the Americans turned against Browns, how there was a rapid rise, in targeting the Muslim community, and how there was a huge confusion between, the Asians as, who is a Muslim and who isn't. And with that, a lot of screening of the people who were brown started. And it is then that Vikram says that when it happened to me is when I realized that he had a friend who was his friend in 1984, and how his friend used to feel this segregation, in India, owing to his identity markers. And so Vikram locates that book in the diasporic space, and he talks about these questions of identity, and he returns to history, which go hand in hand in making identities. I would open up my discussion through a case study, rooting it to Jhumpa Lahiri's both book and the film, because the topic was basically about writings and cinema. So this, became an interesting book, because I thought I would be able to kind of do justice to the topic if I take up, a book which has a film as well as, a novel. So interestingly, Indian cinema or Bollywood did a great job, or did had its presence, in the Indian cinema. And it also changed, the kind of the way Indian cinema was kind of visible, in the mid 1990s. And in mid 1990s, we see shining Indians, slogan. And all of a sudden, we see a number of films that came up, which were either being shot, in spaces which were, outside India, either in London or in America. And, these were, actually, London became quite prominent. And if I take case of two films, Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, and the other one was this film, the Shah Rukh Khan's um, film. I'll just get the name. I'm so sorry about it. Kajol's and Shah Rukh Khan's Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, DDLJ. So these two films, if we see, there is kind of a project Shining India, which comes to us. And the reason for these films to come up at that point was also because India was welcoming the liberalization, and it was welcoming foreign investors, and it was opening up a space for a foreign audience to engage. So these films also, in a way, brought together diasporic audience together. So in a way, they were kind of redefining the notion of nation. And when we see these films, of course, there are certain problem areas, but all of a sudden, nationalism, patriotism becomes central in these films. And so even if one is outside India, India is within the heart, the spirit is, the soul is in India. And therefore, we do see in Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, the ideal wife, Kajol, she in the end, sings the national song. And when we see in DDLJ, the patriarch father, he is very much rooted to his village, and he wants to marry his daughter, in his own land. So we do see, that comes out as an agenda, and that kind of addresses the whole question of nationalism and nation. And at the same time, it is also promoting an idea of a woman. So how, even if a girl who has stayed outside, she has to still be very Indian, very feminine. Once she comes to India, she's only going to, wear suits, and she's not going to be loudmouth. And so there is, restructuring of that stereotypical, domesticated woman, more Indian than the Indian women themselves. And as we move forward, when we move forward to around early 2000s, you know uh, the negotiation of India and the Indian world outside India continues. And one of these major novels, makes its way in 2003. uh, it becomes the winner of Pulitzer Prize. And Jhumpa Lahiri is a second generation Bengali Indian in America. Her first book was Interpreter of Maladies, in which she definitely brings out, this association of an American, with the homeland, with India itself. Now, and then, this novel is adapted by Meera Nair in 2006. The script is written by uh, Sony Tara Purewala, and the actors are Tabu, Irfan Khan, Kalfen, and Sahira Nair. Again, for those who've not read the novel or who have not watched the film, I'll just try to give a small plot. It's a family. It's a story of a woman who actually gets married to a boy who is in America, who is a MIT scholar, and who is now, who's done engineering from there, and who's now into teaching. Uh, so it's like, Tabu is in Calcutta. Sorry, Ashima, the protagonist who's being played by Tabu, is in Calcutta, and she is rooted in a Bengali household. She marries, Ashok, played by Irfan Khan, and she moves with him to America. So, moving away from a joint family, now she is in a nuclear family, just the husband and wife together. There is a family. They have a son and a daughter. The son and daughter are kind of accultured. They are very much American, but at the same time, the Indian values are being introduced to them. So they are not completely assimilated. So they are accultured, and later on we do see that the daughter kind of is moving towards assimilation. The daughter is Sonia. So it's sometimes one wonders whether the book is about Ashima or the book is about their son Gugol. Uh, and when we look at the book and when we look at the film, um, the book has the word. The film, has the camera. So there is a whole full grammar of cinema that enters into making the film. Now both the novel and the film, they project a movement from Calcutta to Boston and then to New York. And we see how, for Ashima, who is a rooted Bengali, she comes to America, and in a way, we can say she still stays rooted to Calcutta because she's unable to give up, her own ethnicity, even her food habits. And though she becomes an empowered woman, though she gets into, working space, but she still stays rooted to being, a Bengali. And here, her children kind of are accultured because she has a son who is in appearance also, excuse me, who in appearance is also like uh, more like an American boy with long hair and, a bit more, hippie. He takes on to smoking hookah and marijuana, and so he is kind of, in between. And then we see, that there is a conflict within the work. Ashok, dies at a young age, and there is a complete change for Gugol, who is Ashok's son, and his other name is Nikhil. And how he returns, to his own Indianness, to his own Indian value system. As the novel and both the film begin, um, Ashok is actually traveling in a train, and there is a co-passenger who tells him that, in order to travel, one should read books. Excuse me. Ashok is reading a book by a Russian author, Gogol, and he by Nikolai Gogol, and he is reading a story called The Overcoat, and it is then when the train meets with an accident. Ashok you know, Ashok has actually torn off the page from his book, and that's what, he's clutching in his hand, and he is immersed under the, debris um, on him. And when the rescue team comes, Ashok, in a way, moves his hand, and it is the movement, of the page that he is holding, that they come to know that there is a alive man here, and that is what had saved Ashok's life. Now, Ashok is completely rooted to Google. So when their son is born, the doctor asks them to name the son. According to the Bengali tradition, the name of the son has to come from the grandmother. The letter never reaches them. The grandmother also expires, and before leaving the hospital, in America, they have to name the son. So they name the son Gugol, and they decide to, Gugol is the nickname, and they decide to give him the real name as Nikhil. Nikhil also coming up from Nikolai, but a Indian name. And it is how Google is now named. So Google, when he goes to school, he does not relate to the name Nikhil and wishes to be called Google. And throughout his life, he lives with this identity. But later on, he starts getting troubled with this identity. And he does not like his name anymore until his father then tells him why he was given this name. So when we look at, how this entire plot is projected in the novel has its own narratology, and which somewhere is, kind of captured on the camera. So as one reads, in a way, I mean, if I have to give my own remark for the novel, I would say the novel is much more intense than the film. The film is not able to do justice to a lot of similar incidences in the novel, particularly also to this incidence of the rail accident. Now, the background of this slide that we see, is snippets of Ashok reading a book, and whereas the novel in a way becomes more graphic than the film itself. And one can kind of imagine the first scene when Ashok has met with an accident. Also, as Ashima, when she moves to America with her husband, she wishes to eat muri, a very much typical Bengali dish. And she tries to make them, but she has not got all the complete ingredients. And therefore, she makes it with whatever is available to her. And it is here now that one sees elaborate details within the novel, and one relates to that lack which Ashima is facing in even in the food culture, and how she again is taken back to the place of her own belonging, which the camera is not able to tackle at all. And there are a lot of metaphors which are being used. We do see that but many a times camera does justice to those metaphors, because right in the beginning, as Ashima comes to America, she's not kind of very happy here, and she is very lonely. It's a very cold country, it's winters, and this screenshot which I've kind of brought out on this um, slide, we can see Ashok going for work, and this is Ashima standing here. So the camera captures her in black. So it's a black and white clip over here. It's just a shadow image. It's, she is within the window, so she is in a frame over there, and it's like a depiction of her loneliness, and how this cold is also internalizing her. And immediately after that, there is a scene where there is an ice list, and so it's dripping, it's kind of melting, so there's one drop that falls from the ice list, and this in a way depicts Ashima's alienation and loneliness. And later on, when Ashok expires, you know, before that we have a very hippie kind of I'm sorry to use this word, but a very stylish boy, who has long hair, unkempt hair. And the moment he comes to know about his father's death, he shaves off his hair to meet his mother at the airport. And it is at this moment that he realizes his Indian identity and he complies by it. And just before this, he has been in love with an American girl, a blonde white girl whom he in fact disapproves of immediately after this incident. And he gets so emotional that he is not able to kind of continue his relationship with her. And so after the father has expired, after the father is no more, there is a gathering in Ashima's house of all the Bengalis, and it's the Bengali community that comes together. The only person who stands out in this clip, is the blonde girlfriend, Gugol's girlfriend. And everybody out here is Bengali, and they're carrying out, the ceremonies, the death ceremonies. Similarly, so later on, Google is introduced to family friend's daughter, who's a Bengali, who's Moshmi, and he agrees to marry her. That's a different reason that they do get divorced, and this marriage doesn't last long. And so the idea here is, within these diasporic places, the customs are carried with great precision, right? And it is these occasions when there is also a collective remembering for the community. The community comes together at these places, and if we see, the community is an isolated community, purely the Bengalis or the Indians who would have come together. For Ashima, she is rooted in her past. The clip in which the shoes are shown, these are shoes which are in a way very jazzy shoes, which are Ashok's shoes, and these shoes he had removed when he had come to see her for marriage. And there's a very beautiful scene in the film where Ashima wears these shoes and she walks in these shoes, and it's like kind of accepting her husband. And later on, throughout the novel and throughout the film, she refuses to give up her ethnic identity. Even at the time when she is delivering the babies, she's supposed to wear a knee length gown, and she tries to cover her legs with that knee length gown because she is accustomed to saris. uh, the second clip here, where she's playing a veena, it's like, after Ashok's death, and she chooses to return to India. The difference in the novel and the film is that in the novel she chooses to return to India, but in the film, it does not talk about her return. And so it's here, we see the Calcutta house here, and she's sitting on the roof, and then she's playing Veena. So she, in a way, is able to identify with her own self only after returning, to her own place of belonging. She feels that if Ashok has gone, she has nothing more to do, in this country. Uh, the next case that I take is purely from a film, but this film is again adapted from Mahesh Dattani's play Nag Mandala, but it is a complete adaptation. The name of the film is Videsh, which was directed by Deepa Mehta and in 2008. And this is also called Heaven on Earth. The film's location is Canada. It's a diasporic space where there is a Punjabi family. And since I'm only talking about Bollywood, but I would also like to bring a fact here that there is a huge work done in Punjabi diasporic cinema, and there are n number of Punjabi films which deal with the diaspora, with the conflict of Punjab and Canada or London or America as a diasporic space, and what happens to people. So, this film becomes very important because this comes out in 2008, and it's no more now, kind of, it does not work on the agenda of, the same Indian domestic woman. Rather, this is kind of, it offers a liberation to the woman who comes from a very rooted culture, a very patriarchal culture. So this girl, her name is Chand, played by Preeti Zinta, gets married to Rocky Singh, played by Vansh Bharadwaj. So uh, and it's something which actually happened in Punjab. So she was married in Punjab with a photograph, and she had not even seen the boy whom she was marrying. She travels alone to Canada, and in Canada, there is a formal marriage that takes place. So these are two clips, as there is a celebration in Punjab where the girl is dancing on her marriage ceremony. And as she reaches Canada, the second clip, of Preeti Zinta is as she reaches Canada, she's going to her in-laws, who are now going to, take her home, and the next day they're going to get married. And the boy in question, whom she is supposed to marry, is standing right behind her, and his name is Rocky Singh. It's the first time that she's going to see who that boy is. They get married. It's a film about the struggle of this Punjabi family in Canada. They all live in, a very small flat, just about 2 rooms. During the day, they all move out from the house and they rent it to a person who comes to sleep during the day as he works at night. The husband and the in-laws are very rough to this girl. They beat her quite a bit, and they kind of, also don't trust her, and she has no relationship with her husband. At work, she's also supposed to help the family because the family cannot kind of afford so many members. So she goes to work, and at work, her Jamaican friend gives her, uh, she gives her a plant which she asks her to give her husband in milk, and then she would be able to control the husband. Uh, Instead of, there's some kind of a confusion, and she has to drop that milk in a hole in the garden in which there is a snake. And that snake, now takes the shape of her husband and comes and, lures her. So there is a kind of a double connection over here between her husband and the snake as her husband. And towards the end of the film, she has to give, kind of Agni Pariksha. She has to actually, hold the snake, and she has to prove her virginity and that she has not kind of, slept with, any other man. And then she, in a way, decides she's not going to stay with this family, and she moves out and she returns to India. So here we see a bit of a liberation, but one looks at, the reality of the imagined construct which, people in India have constructed about the diasporic spaces, and it brings to fore the conflict, which is actually there in reality. So these two clips are, after she's been beaten by her husband, she's talking to her Jamaican friend. And the second is, the ending of the film, which says, hell is better than a heaven with no dignity. And here we do see, it does not, I mean, in a way, this film counters, this idea of ideal domestic woman, and it in a way gives a sense of dignity to the Indian woman, that even if she is like not she does not need to continue being there, and she has the choice or the freedom to return. And therefore, what we see, there are number of shifts, and in this, when we travel across, from our space to another, so there are number of shifts, and many of these shifts are contrasting. So on one hand, where communities think about the other land as progressive, as more meaningful, or one could able one maybe one is able to kind of earn better. It's not so easy, and it's not simple, but because there is a huge negotiation that works around, and that negotiation is both physical as well as mental. And it's around, this girl here, Chand, doesn't even get a chance to remember her family, and she does miss her family, but she is not able to, because she is herself jostling and struggling with this new family she is in, and she's completely alienated in this world. So what happens with the people in diaspora are like, even in the bid to find their own identities, they are actually nowhere. There is a huge identity crisis, and they jostle between the in-betweenness, and nowhereness. And it's also like kind of, there is a certain ambivalence at work, and that ambivalence is between seeking acceptance, seeking acceptance in this new culture, and negotiating with your own culture, and this is becoming prevalent because with globalization, transnationalism has increased. There is a huge lot of movement. People go out for various reasons, with cosmopolitanism. Consumerism has also kind of increased. So economy is a very important factor that takes these people abroad. But then, there is always a continuous negotiation between the self, between a world that is your own and the other world. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we shall move on to the Q&A session, which will be led by Ms. Meti Jobi.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thanks a lot, Dr. Ishmeet, for such an amazing, lucid presentation. It flew like a story. Okay, thank you so much. We were really able to relate to you the way you began and you ended. Almost an hour or so. All of us were engrossed into it. Thank you so much. I'm sure our listeners have also got a few queries in their minds. We've jotted down a few questions from the chat box. If we can take those up, and I request Dr. Ishmeet to address those queries. Yeah, do we begin, ma'am?
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, the first question put forth is by Perlin P. She asks, memory can be distorted and fragmented with time. How will it define the notion of home and nostalgia with fragmented memories? Because they are very understanding of their very understanding of home gets replaced with displacement, and belongingness is replaced with rootlessness, where trauma forms a new identity for the victims. Can you explain? You want me to pretty long? You want me to read that again?
No, I think I'm good with it, and but I'm very happy that this question has come up because this is a question that, in a way, explains the diasporic dilemma in itself. So I have used a word called temporal, rooted in time. So a lot of times, what happens is, and Indian writers particularly have addressed that quite a bit. So, what happens is when people move away from home, they are rooted in the time of the movement. So for them, the time of being located back home stops there, and they move on. So they move on into, the new land. For example, for Ashima, time stops the moment, the Indian time, her time with family, her own time stops the moment, she moves away with Ashok in marriage and comes to America. And somehow in Jhumpa Lahiri's, this work, this has not been addressed so much. But uh, this does get addressed, in many other writers' works, and V.S. Naipaul does that very well. So what happens is, like, the protagonist stays rooted in the time, and he starts looking back at the country with the perception of one's own time. And once that protagonist gets time to come back to know one's own country, the protagonist sees that everything has changed, because even that country is progressing. It's moving ahead, people have grown, people have moved. So it's that Kabuli wala syndrome, where the Kabuli wala is stuck back in time, thinking that his daughter, would still be a small child, or the girl he met would still be a small child. you know so that's definitely there. And yes, the question about, because this question has two questions in it. The other question is about fragmented memories. uh, Memories will always be fragmented, because it's beyond human capability to kind of remember everything in its complete neatness. I doubt that any one of us would have that kind of a memory. But the question, and this also takes us into an extended concern about how reliable memories are. So if I address that, I would actually say memories are not at all reliable. Memories are fragmented, but what makes memory reliable is the experience. Because whoever is remembering, and whoever is, whether a protagonist in a novel, or a person in a diasporic space, the person itself, I mean, sociologically, a person rooted in a diasporic space, when that person remembers, remembers through the experience. So, in Badami's text is rooted around 1984 violence. And so in Badami's text, whatever is being reproduced, it's not like kind of that everything actually happened that ways. There is a fictional element in that. There is kind of, because there is narrative at work. So narrative is restructuring memory. And so therefore, we are not much worried about whether memory is reliable or not, right? But what we are more concerned about is the experience from where that memory is coming. And maybe one more example I can give, and this works very well for trauma studies. So a lot of people who wrote narratives around Holocaust experiences, they talk about how their memories are picturesque, right? But then there are lags even in those accounts, right? So what we as researchers are not so much worried about, whether they are reproducing in exactness. We know it is the truth. The truth is coming to us from the experience, because nobody can deny Holocaust. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope, ma'am, Pearly ma'am, the answer has, you've got the answer for your question. We move forward to Mr. Satish K's
Thank you.
question. Post-COVID, what are the diasporic concerns you foresee, especially in terms of language and culture, with the impact of returnees?
All right, I think very, very interesting, and I'll answer this because a lot of literature is yet to come around COVID. But I would answer this by rooting it in a case, So there's a small book, a booklet which has come up by um, one of the budding writers, right? And she writes this 50-page book of her experience of COVID. The writer is situated, I mean, she's an Indian American, she's an Indian posted in America, let me put it like that, and she's been in America for a couple of years. During COVID, she was not able to visit India. She has not been able to visit her family. But at the same time, in her novel, the protagonist is a wife with a small child stuck in India, and the husband is in New York. So there is an exchange of letters between the two, and they are describing, their own states of mind. So the wife in the letters, because time is moving on and the child grows very fast, so it's a small child, and every day there is a new movement, and they don't know when are they going to meet. They do video conferencing, they talk to each other, she is explaining to the husband what's happening with the child, and there is a self which is now elsewhere. Whether you are at home, still that self is elsewhere, because you are elsewhere. So I don't know if I am able to answer your question. I don't think I've been able to answer your question, but I am equally excited and waiting for new literature to come up, around and from diaspora, around this whole experience of pandemic, in a way where pandemic has separated all of us. It has also brought us all together. So all of us were worried about each other, and I think that is what also happened, and people who've been away from home, I'm sure they are now realizing the value of home quite a bit. I don't know what's going to happen with jobs, because there's been a lot of tension, there's been a lot of stress. People have lost jobs, they were not able to return home, their dreams haven't been fulfilled. So yes, there are problems, but I'm not sure if I've been able to answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, this thought was there in my mind too. Actually, this COVID has brought in the collective memory, possibly a decade down the line, we might just remember COVID as a collective memory for all of us, irrespective of the nation we belong to. All right. Moving on to the next question, we have Purva Ji. She has posted a question. In diasporic narratives, how can we come across the notion of being and becoming, making and unmaking of a nation? A construction of new space is built on the premise of displacement, dislocation, and alienation.
Okay, a very long question actually. So I'll divide it into two parts. I'll look at these keywords: making, unmaking, becoming, and being first, right? So, uh, largely with movements, we encounter cultural displacement. So when we talk of, you know, making and unmaking, or being and becoming. So as we are all, all of us, I mean, there's no denying the fact, that all of us are born in certain cultures, and we do imply to those cultures, whether we want to accept them or we don't want to accept them. We are born into religions, whether we want to accept them, we don't want to accept them. So we are kind of, if even if we don't kind of identify ourselves in those cultures. We others identify us, as per those cultures. So the moment you are in spaces which are not yours or which are multicultural spaces, people do stand out, and they stand out primarily from their differences of skin. you know so I often in my classes also give this example. The moment we see a white person in India, we start guessing, right? Who that person is, where that person comes from. Would he be American? Would he be European? And then we come to know, oh, that person was an Australian, right? So we have clubbed people, in different categories as per how we look. The basic identity factor is how we look, the color of the skin. So we all are, rooted in these cultures. Even if we are not rooted, we are categorized according to different cultures. Asian culture or a Western culture or a black culture, or beginning from there. And then there are lots of, it's a mesh, it's a kind of a matrix. So there are a lot of other factors which will determine who we are, and we are made by that. We tend to we are made by that, and then we also tend to kind of accept ourselves, because there's certain things which we accept, there's certain things which we reject. So there is a making of it. But then the moment we move into different spaces, which perhaps are not ours, can we live with an equal amount of freedom as we were living in our own spaces? And that is the time when we remake, or that is the time when there is a making of your own self, which now completely changes, which in a way leads to becoming. So you become, what you were not, right? You don't want to speak in an American accent, but when you go for work, you have to speak in English, right? And you pick up that accent, even if not completely, maybe some words, right? 10 or something like that, and so you actually become a part of it. So there is a remolding of your own self, and all other keywords, like I think the other keywords were assimilation or acculturation. I don't know the other part, or I don't remember the other part of the question. It was too long. But I think all other keywords also factor in this making of you as the other, or making of you as a different person, of you becoming a different person, right?
Okay, thank you, Ishmeet ma'am. I hope that that question was answered. We have another question put forth by Supriya ma'am. Considering a third or fourth generations, their collective memory is connected with the host land, which they consider their homeland. How the memory is different? How that memory is different from their forefathers to theirs? How is that different?
In fact, this is very interesting, and also thanks for bringing this up, because I did not touch upon the notion of loss. I touched upon it slightly when I was talking about, my grandmother possessing that glass and keeping it securely. So that was where I was talking about the notion of loss. So in fact, there is the crisis of movement is precisely this, that the newer generations, they become indifferent. They become very they lose the culture of the homeland, and they adopt the culture of the hostland. And that is, that's the caution statement. And one cannot do anything about that. So until there are efforts made to bring language or bring cultural art forms to the new generations, it cannot be retained. And one of the major differences, which I see as a third generation of a family that moved during partition, is the very notion in which we perceive the notion of Pakistan, right? For my grandmother, it was her place. And she always said, you guys are pretty intolerant. We lived with, the Muslims primarily. She said they were our friends. We used to, except for eating and marriage, we shared everything. They used to come to our marriage and they used to bring dry nashta, dry, grains for us. And she says, you guys are like, intolerant. Let me bring the word, She said, you guys are intolerant. And so that is the risk. How do we, in this whole dilemma of what the politics does to you, what this cultural distancing does to you, it reshapes you completely. And that is actually the crisis of moving out. This is the crisis of the migrations and the movement. I don't know if that can be in any way negotiated. I don't think so. Right.
Thank you, Dr. Ishmeet. Next question that has been put forth is by Shreya K. What, in your opinion, is the reason behind diasporic writers writing about the past? Chitra Banerjee's Diva Karuni. Is it just recalling memories of past, home left behind, or is it more political?
No, it's in fact, if we really take case of Chitra, Banerjee, she, in fact, because she's giving a very different kind of a writing, she's bringing writers from mythology, and it's kind of a retelling, of the past, retelling of. So, in fact, this in itself, is in a way telling us that how there is a quandary to revisit your past, and in what ways can it be revisited. So when she is writing the Glass Palace, it's from Draupadi's perspective. So it's like this, why does this retelling happen, and now she has an example of a new idea of womanhood, and trying to make sense of, she's trying to make a balance between the past and the present by retelling this whole mythical tale. And this idea of the past and the present comes to her by relocating into a different space, and which in a way pushes her to revisit her own cultural figures, her own, and how do they kind of make sense to her, and then that makes sense to us too. So I think I wonder if she would have been in this space in India, and would she still be interested in retelling and revisiting, because perhaps when you are rooted in the culture yourself, and there is no conflict because you've accepted it as it is. The conflict comes when you move away from it, and it's the result of that conflict that asks her, or that pushes her into this retelling of the tale.
We have one last question that we can take up within this span of time. This is from Ajish Paul George. How far has clothing and fashion in Indian cinema been instrumental in reclaiming identity and roots? Do you really think Indian contour and fashion labels have proved successful enough in fashioning the diasporic space through cinema?
I think very, very interesting, and the answer is it has absolutely had a lot of impact. And the 90s is a very interesting period for me for Bollywood. So there was this suit culture which was introduced, whereas and I remember myself as growing up that time. I was a college student, and we were all moving away from suits. We were not like kind of people who would wear suits. We were all into different kinds of dresses which were available. And 90s, with coming up of the Yashraj Chopra films, and also all these kind of films coming to us, giving us this Project India Shining. There was re-establishment of the suit culture. Everybody would come to the college wearing different kinds of suits, something which Madhuri Dixit had worn, or something which, Rani Mukherjee had worn, or which Kajol had worn. And so it did determine, it did have that kind of an impact. And not just fashion, it was also the textile, the uh, what was it called, the chenille. Chenille became very famous, and there was, and in fact, when you went to the market to buy these, they were known as Madhuri Dixit cotton, or they were known as Kajol. They were given those kind, Kajol print and all. So they were given those kinds of names. So that era definitely, it had a huge impact on it. um, I think more than ethnicity or anything, the larger reason for that was liberalization, a boost to, how would the films kind of enhance the commercial activities. So it was like boosting the Indian market, and also, of course, on the hindsight, creating an exemplarity, or an example of nationalism along with that. So you that needs to be done through ethnicity, through dress. But more than that, I feel it was definitely an economic reason to do it then. But it did have a lot of impact.
We'll take one more question, one quick question, although it is pretty long. I hope you can hear that patiently. Where is this is by Dr. Davis. Where is the ideal national identity in front of the pandemic? Are we not responsible to address the questions of unemployment, reality, politics, history, economics, and reason, in addition to our safety zones of the mythical, literary, cinematic, narrative, fictional, etc., of which we are too fond of, and as a consequence suffer identity crises in the name of loneliness, diaspora, alienation, shadow lines, and schizophrenia?
Absolutely. I think the question in itself is answering what is being asked. And I would add to it, in fact, uh, I think the whole question of nation has been very problematic during the pandemic. And there has been huge attempts at othering other nations, and also projecting our own nation as well. So for example, look at the way we all receive China today, right? Look at the way the notions of how America was handling pandemic was being brought to us, vis-a-vis how our own country was kind of catering to pandemic. The larger problem here is, during the pandemic, again, we are redefining the notion of nation, and we're doing it, by creating the self and the other, exactly in the sense in which the Britishers did that to their colonies, right? And here there are multiple narratives which come up, because along with, when we talk of a nation and when we tell people stay indoors, you know who is that who is that which class is it who can afford to stay indoors? We also migration, of n number of labors, during walking home during the pandemic. So when we are constructing this idea of nation, are we actually constructing a holistic idea of nation, or are we only addressing to a certain number of people? So nation in itself becomes a very, very complicated category, particularly in times of pandemic. On one hand, we see protests come to an end. The Shaheen Bagh protests, they come to an end for pandemic, and then there is, coloring of, a community, that it is the Jamaat which led to the spread of it, and then we see the migrant laborers walking, and then later on we also, see now we see the farmers protest. So when we are addressing the nation, or when we are talking about nation, it's like quite intriguing to understand who composes of that nation, whom are we addressing, right? Are we looking at it completely as a whole set of people and addressing all those sections, or are we just addressing one particular section for whom we are bringing the vaccine, we are bringing the medicine, we are hospitalizing them, we are taking them to the hospital. A lot of people I know around me who were the poor labor class, they did not even visit the hospital. They are going to say we've got COVID and they will admit us. We cannot afford the 8 lakh package, the cruise like package which the hospitals are offering to us. So, I mean, this whole question of nation is quite complicated. We need to question it, and we need to kind of address it also, and not just in our own idea of nation, but we also need to look at it how we are creating this concept of nation vis-a-vis and in comparison to other nations. So the moment there is a question about handling the pandemic, oh no, we are a nation with a huge population, we have our own problems, right? So why are we always in comparison with other countries, right? Are we doing enough to address our own local problems? So I think there is a problem in defining the whole question of nation in itself, and then re-looking at it. So it's highly problematic. It's very complicated. It's meshy, and of course the political forces which are working around it do have a huge control on it, and they should be accountable for this kind of a production also. I know I've not been able to address it completely, but I do feel very passionately about this concern which has been raised.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ishmeet, for so patiently listening, hearing the questions that were put forth and answering them. Over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Metti. Thank you, Dr. Ishmeet Kaur. To share some concluding remarks, I invite our respected principal, the true leader of our Sahabian team, Dr. Jensen P.U.
Respected resource person, Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry, Head of Department, Professor Sheena Sara, our faculty members, my dear students, and the delegates, both online and offline. First of all, I congratulate you, Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry, for explaining or for presenting, and in a very good way you have answered all the queries raised by the participants. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And as far as I am concerned, I want to just explain some of the things I can understand from your talk. I have enjoyed very well for this the last 1.5 hours. You have explained everything in a nice manner by quoting some very good examples, just like Jubilee cinema, novel, and everything. As far as I'm concerned, diaspora means it is scattering or coming together. It's about social formation outside the nation of origin. People stay connected in time, in cultural imagination. All these things you have explained very well by citing so many examples. Memory plays a key role in establishing a collective consciousness. Cultural practices bring together members of the diasporic community. Our lives are a constant negotiation between past and present. Lastly, I want to comment forced as well as voluntary movement restructures one's identity. I am concluding with these words because you have explained it very well, and the time is also running fastly because we have planned to finish at 12 o'clock. Because of your nice presentation, I think all delegates patiently hearing and enjoying your presentation. Once again, on behalf of all present here and on behalf of all present online, I express my hearty congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. To end is tough, especially with such an interesting topic. It is no easier. I would like to call Ms. Maria Joshi, Assistant Professor, to wrap this exciting webinar at its best.
Good afternoon, everyone. I take this opportunity to officially propose a note of gratitude. First, I would like to thank our resource person, Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry, for this refining session. Ma'am, it was really informative and wonderful session, and I'm pretty sure the knowledge that you gave us will definitely help to strive in progress. In spite of your hectic schedule, you took time to interact and share your valuable ideas with us. On behalf of our college and postgraduate Department of English, I express my heartfelt gratitude to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next, I would like to thank our Executive Director, Reverend Dr. Father Davis Chigniadan, the torchbearer of our institution, for inaugurating our webinar and extending great support throughout. Sincerity and righteousness are personified in our dear Executive Director. I extend a warm gratitude to our Father. Next, I offer my sincere gratitude to our beloved Principal, Dr. Jensen Pio, for being here and your enthusiastic support throughout. Thank you, sir. I also extend my gratitude to our Vice Principals, Dr. Rani MG and Dr. Matthew Lucan, for your kind and constant support throughout. Now, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our HOD, Ms. Sheena, who is the epitome of hard work and success. She is a person of great initiatives and innovative thinking and a pure soul who always offers keen dedication. Thank you, ma'am, for your constant support and strength. Now, I extend my gratitude to all my dear colleagues who were there from the beginning, offering their time and unflinching support and coordination throughout. Thank you all. I also extend a big gratitude to all the delegates and participants in the webinar for making it a huge success. Thank you all. And I extend my warm gratitude to the technical staff for all your support. You are the pillar of our strength. Rendit sir, Ashwin, Jasna, thank you for your time and patience throughout. I also thank all my dear students for your help, and especially Elizabeth, Arthur, Alexina for being here and your constant support throughout. Thank you. I also take this opportunity to propose gratitude to those who have directly and indirectly contributed to the webinar. Once again, thanking you all. Thank you.
In these webinars and online classes, each one of us and our valuable presence has made things better to make this seminar a spectacular one. Thank you, each and every one. The feedback forms will be provided after the webinar. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure. Thank you.